Well, there's no risk that we won't hear a fine presentation from the next presenter, who is George Spaeth. He's talking about patients, all of us, or many of us, as knights, knaves, or pawns. And so, here is Dr. George Spaeth. Dr. Spaeth.
As I've been listening, I'm aware of how lucky I am to be part of this group of people who are so thoughtful and able to communicate their thoughts so well. I hope you're feeling the same way. Some of you may remember Madame Chiang Kai-Shek. She was the wife of general who was in charge of the Chinese forces at the time of the Second World War. And she wrote, "We write our own destiny. We become what we do." Now, put yourself in China at the end of the Second World War. Buildings are bombed out, everything stinks. There's not much food. What there is probably spoiled. There's no electricity to speak of. You're cold. Pretty tough life. The same thing was happening in other places in the world. A book was written about the people who found themselves in that situation. The book was called Knights, Knaves, or Pawns. I read a book review and I was absolutely fascinated by this idea. And it was saying in this situation, the end of a war, and of course at all times actually, people can be kind of divided up into knights, knaves, and pawns. Now a knight is somebody who's working for everybody else's best interest. Knaves, we all know, those are people who make use of the bad situation for their own benefit. And then the pawns, they're people just get pushed around. So I think we can think of, in many ways, as John Foster Kennedy, kind of a knight. He was really working to try to make the country better. Martin Luther King literally sacrificed himself for the benefit of other people. So these are knights working for other people and trying to do it well. Then there's this lovely smiling man who some of you may recognize, hope not recommend, who was, like many knaves, comes off pretty well in one way. But Mr. Madoff didn't help many people long term. And then there's O.J. Simpson, who was a hero for many, many people, but somehow something went wrong somewhere along the line. So we have these knaves. The Queen of Hearts, she made some tarts all on a summer day. The Knave of Hearts, he stole those tarts and took them clean away. And then, of course, they're pawns. Now, as I was thinking about this, I was thinking there in the game of chess, some of you may know it, there are knights and they're pawns. There's also the king and the queen. Who is the weakest person in a chessboard? The king. And who is the strongest person? The queen. And I thought, whoever designed that really had their wits about them. But pawns, you know, they just get moved around. And they don't add anything themselves. So a knight is an inspirational person working for the good of all. A knave is a scoundrel, scallywag, and a pawn is a chess piece, or used more broadly, person used by others, especially for security, some sort of really a slave. So we can think of people as knights, John Foster Kennedy, or knaves, Mr. Madoff, or many of us, as pawns. Now, let's think of patients in that way. What would be a patient as a knight? Well, somebody comes to their appointment well prepared, they volunteer to help other patients, they participate in studies. You know, we forget that nothing gets learned unless it gets studied. I sat in the back of the room there absolutely fascinated by Dr. Meyer's talk and was thinking, gosh, if we could always think that clearly. We need studies. You know, somebody's, well, is that new surgery going to work? The only answer that's honest is, I don't know. But we have to have an answer, and we have to make a decision. So how do we know what to do? Well, we can guess at it, or we can study it and find out. And we're always trying to do that here at Wills, and that needs participants, people with a disease, glaucoma or some other disease, and it also needs people who don't have those diseases. Because in order to control the way you can get your results, you have to study people who don't have the disease also. So we really need, science needs, all of you need people who are willing to participate in these research studies. Now, patients as knaves. And how are you doing? Oh, I'm doing great. Well, your visual field looks a lot worse. Oh, no, I'm doing just great. Well, your wife says she won't drive with you anymore. That's not very helpful. And it may be tempting, but it doesn't work. And this goes along with Dr. Montevotti's excellent talk, patients as pawns. One wonders, why do people not take care of themselves? And few of us do, at least very well. How can that be? Why wouldn't we all want to take care of ourselves? Well, it's a damn nuisance, that's one of the things. And it also involves all sorts of disciplines and doing things we don't like. I like to eat pastries. I just love pastries. I just had 3 of those delicious oatmeal cookies. I can't believe it. I mean, God, stupid. So we all have that in us, and I'll get to that in a moment. But it doesn't work, as Dr. Montevotti pointed out. So, who's going to be the healthiest person? Who's going to get the best care? And who's going to be the happiest? The knights, the knaves, or the pawns? Well, I think it's pretty clear. Now, doctors could also be thought of as knights, knaves, and pawns. There's some doctors who are out there working competently for trying for the benefit of all, and then there are doctors who exploit patients and the profession for their own benefit. And then there are lots of doctors who are, well, I'm just going to work today, see if I can get through the day and not have too much trouble. And whose doctors are going to be the best? The knights, the knaves, or the pawns? I think it's pretty clear. But in actuality, that's too simple. Because we all have in us some of the knight. That's why you're here. We all have in some of the knave. Well, we're hoping to learn something maybe that's going to help us, a little more than somebody else. And we're all pawns. And we're all at the mercy of fate and chance and government. And how do we work that so that we can get the knave of us out of there and the knight of us in there? Who we are is a combination of 3 things. Our building blocks, our genes, what we're made out of. We can't control that, and the likelihood is we're never going to be able to control that. There are some studies out now that are changing gene structure. Some of them work for some very rare diseases. Whether they work long-term, what the effects on other genes are going to be from that, nobody knows. It's not likely that we're going to be in a situation where we can sort of buy a new set of genes. So we're stuck with that. It's hard to change our circumstances. We're born into certain families, sometimes with good parents, sometimes with bad parents. We walk along the street and a flower pot falls on our head and hits us. But we can change what we do. So the three things that determine who we are, the only one we have any control over is what we do. So, very interesting is that we all have genes that are positive, we all have genes that are negative, but most of our genes are asleep most of the time. And some of the genes that are bad are being suppressed by our immune system. There's a whole field now in medicine called Epigenetics, which deals with what makes genes work and what makes genes not work. Because just the way we have knights, knaves, and pawns in us, we have different genes in us. What we eat, how we think, how we live affects how those genes that we have express themselves. So while we can't change our genes, we can change how those genes show themselves. Now, I love this quote by Benjamin Disraeli, interesting that it's already cited today. Circumstances are beyond human control, but our conduct is in our own power. So I was saying, along the same line, our genes are mostly asleep most of the time, but they wake up because of what we do. And this field of epigenetics, the study of what causes genes to express themselves, is an enormously important field which we better pay a lot of attention to and think about how it applies to ourselves. So, while we can't affect which genes we're given, we can affect how they express themselves. Our immune system is enormously important in whether we're sick or well or happy or sad. Very interesting recent new thinking about these little moles we have. For many, many years it's been thought that these moles occur and they grow and sometimes something happens and they become cancers. And if you can catch them when they're in their very, very early stage and cut them out, well, then the person's going to do all right. Now, recently there's been fascinating work coming out that says, no, that's dead wrong. Actually, every one of those moles we have started as a cancer. And it was growing like crazy, and then something in our immune system said, hey, I don't like that. That's not the cell that I want in my body, and it turns it off. Somehow I think that sounds a little more right than the other one, although probably it's a little bit of both. And our immune system is enormously healthy. Well, what affects our immune system? How much sleep we get, how much exercise we get, whether we're happy or sad affects it too. The half-full, half-empty glass is not just a apocryphal story. It affects how people actually become healthy or sick. Whether we think positive or negative thoughts have been shown, especially by Herbert Benson up at Beth Israel Hospital in Boston, has huge direct effects on whether our stomach gets sick, whether we get cancer, whether we get high blood pressure. So I think one of my jobs as a physician is to try to get this message across to you folks, and that's why I chose this subject. But my primary responsibility is to try to help you take care of your own health. We write our own destiny. We become what we do. Can I try to elaborate on any of those things? Any questions, any comments we can have? George?